And at the Amsat Dayton Forum this past May, Tony Hutchinson, VK5ZAI, gave the presentation in Frank's absence. I've adopted it today for the basis of the talk here and updated it a little bit based on the things that have gone on since Dayton, and in particular the trip, the face-to-face meeting we just concluded in Moscow over the last couple of weeks. So I've got a little bit of an update to what's going on with ARIS, and a little bit of fun in Moscow and Kaluga as well. So we'll get right on into it. First off, the reason Frank didn't give this presentation in Dayton was he was at the funeral for our friend Dr. Ron Parise. Ron passed away of cancer in early May, and we've dedicated a lot of things to Ron. I wanted to mention one thing about Ron myself. Everyone has some memory of Ron. He was an astronaut that flew a couple of times and was a real friend of ARIS, one of the founders of ARIS, and did a lot for it. I think the last time I talked at this conference, I had done a operation with a school in Fort Worth, and part of that operation was the Soviet space station was up at the time. The kids wanted to talk to the space station. We couldn't get it on the schedule, but I called Ron at Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, and Ron went down to WA3NAN and got the HF station on 20 meters, and we had a station set up in the gymnasium, and Ron answered questions for the school kids for an hour, and it was all over the school. So Ron is a real friend, and he'll be greatly missed. Okay. Most people, I think, already know what ARIS stands for, Amateur Radio on the International Space Station, but it's a program that inspires students to pursue careers in science and engineering and so on through getting them interested in space. One of the main things we do is to actually provide contacts worldwide with schools and the astronauts on board the space station. And it does provide, as it mentions here, once-in-a-lifetime human spaceflight pursuit. And interest in ham radio too. I know that's one of the reasons I've been involved in it. Every time I go out to a school and help a school get in contact, it's a life-changing experience for me every time. I mean, it's just that much fun. Here's some pictures of some of the people. We had it on board the ISS right after the first payload. You noticed in the upper right-hand corner there, Sergei Krikalev was one of the early ones, and he was, of course, on Mir and other missions. I believe it was Carlos talked about Sergei the other day, and I will add this at this time. Just this past week, I stayed over after the main part of the ARIS conference for some meetings that we had at Energia on SUTSAT-2 follow-on, and we got to speak to Sergei again. Sergei is now an executive in the Energia corporation in Russia. But to add on some of the things, I think Graham may talk a little bit more about the Columbia involvement, but we have recently in the last year or so, within the last year, put the L-band, S-band antennas up on the Columbia module, as we mentioned here. Let's see, we've been using the D700 for a long time. There's a lot of things going on with that. We have now completed 346 schools worldwide with school contacts. We'll show a little bit more about that in a minute. We've had 17 consecutive ISS expedition crews on board to use the radios, and over 15,000 students touched each year by these contacts. Millions, of course, have heard it over the TV networks and things that we try to tie into the school contacts. And of course, the last bullet on here is SUTSAT-1 radio SCAF deployed from the ISS, a little over a year ago, I believe, and it lasted longer than we thought it did. Part of it didn't work as well as we had hoped, but it was one of the best media events ham radio has ever had. A good part of the discussions that we had in Moscow last week had bearing on SUTSAT-2, which will be a much more involved, much more capable model than SUTSAT-1. This is just a graphic showing the numbers of contacts through the years. You see there's been some lean years and some good years, but we've had as many as 70 contacts in a year in 2007, for example. That was a really good year. That's when Bill MacArthur was up there, and Suni Williams and several others. Here's a better list of them. Expedition 5, the 5 top ones that we had so far. Expedition 15 did 39 contacts, 12, 38, and so on down. Notice that Bill MacArthur did 37 of those, and of course Bill was one of the hams. He was commander of the mission, and he was one of the astronauts that was a real dedicated ham. He, in addition to his 37 school contacts, I believe worked all states in the United States. He worked WAC on both 2 meters and 70 centimeters. He had over 130 countries on DXCC, a special DXCC, and was a real active ham on board the space station. The picture here below is Suni Williams, KD-5 PLD, and a little side note on that, Graham and Carlos were in Moscow as well, but I think it was Tuesday or maybe Wednesday after Graham and Carlos left, Suni shows up in the hotel at the Volga, and got to visit with her again. I had mentored a school for her. I'm one of the ARIS mentors that helps line these contacts up. And the unique thing about it, Suni is an American of Indian descent. And one of the schools that I worked on with her was a school on the Winnebago Indian Reservation in Winnebago, Nebraska, in the middle of the United States. And the students were all Native Americans or American Indians. So here's a Indian American talking to American Indians. Very interesting contact. But she remembered that well, and she thoroughly enjoys talking to the kids, by the way. This is some of the recent operations. Actually, when this was at Dayton, so that was the most recent contact before Dayton at the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. But it was a big operation. We've since then had several more school contacts, including, I believe the most recent one today is one in Hungary that just took place a couple of days ago. So they're still continuing on. We notice here on the recent past, we've had Bill MacArthur and Suni Williams, Clay Anderson were all very, very prolific. General QSOs. Bill, of course, is the champion of that in recent times, but we had, at the time this was written, we had very few contacts going on, and there was a period of time during Expedition 16 when they were installing the U.S. Harmony module, the European Columbus module, and the Japanese Kibo module. Had 3 shuttle flights, 2 Soyuz flights, and the inaugural ATV operations, that they were just too busy, and we had very few school contacts during those times. And that does happen from time to time. It's dependent on the crew workload, but it's also dependent upon the initiative of the particular astronauts too, to some degree. So best thing I can say there is, if you don't get to talk to an astronaut when you want to, be patient, and a lot of times you'll make it eventually. Now, in the near future, we'll get into this just a little deeper, but we've got Mike Fink and Richard Garriott coming up, and that should help alleviate the, get us back in the heavy amateur radio business again. And when we go to a 6-man crew, we don't know what's going to happen for sure yet. That could either, we could have more contacts with astronauts then, or maybe they'll get so busy that that we'll have less. We're just not real sure. But anyway, the current crew component that we've got up now is 2 Russians, Sergei Volkov and Oleg Kononenko, and Greg Chameltov. Greg's doing most of our school contacts at the moment, KD5 PKZ, but he's doing about 1 a week at the present time. This is where we're at in the overall scheme of things. The purple is Sergei and Greg, but in October of this year, on a Soyuz, we'll have Michael Fink and going up, and at the same time we'll have our next space traveler, Richard Garriott, going up. We'll have another Russian up as well, and then you'll see on down the list. Okay, here's opportunities for you to work with them directly. Now, this is Richard Garriott. Richard, W5KWQ, is the son of Owen Garriott, for those of you that may not remember. And Owen was one of the first amateur radio operators in space on Columbia back in the early 1980s. And Richard is his son. And Richard is proposing a number of activities that we're heavily involved in implementing at the moment. He's talking about taking a lot of Earth view pictures, and at the same time getting them on slow scan, up to 50 Earth views a day. And we want to, they won't all go down on slow scan, but we're wanting to put a lot of those down on slow scan TV. School contacts, they're talking about 2 Challenger centers, 2 international and 2 domestic, meaning in the U.S. Contacts. And they're talking about W5LFL 25th anniversary commemorative ham contacts as well. We do need support from the amateur community for this operation, particularly with the slow scan TV pictures, because we're going to be downlinking, and we want someone to be able to coordinate these pictures, the gathering of the pictures and archiving of the pictures, to make them available. So the slow scan protocol will be the Robot 36, which is a pretty widespread, fairly old protocol, but one that works. And we need people all over the earth, really, to collect and sort and web distribute those pictures. The planned launch for all this is October, and like I say, we're starting a campaign as of right now to Matter of fact, we had a meeting with the Space Adventure Group last week in Moscow to finalize how we're going to go about picking the schools, getting the schools ready, and getting the ATV, the slow scan TV people together and all. About that same time, of course, on the same mission, Mike Fink will be going up. Mike's been up there before. Mike will be commander again on that mission. And Mike is a dedicated ham. He has told us that he would like to do a number of contacts, 2 to 3 a week at least. And he's given a fairly, he's told us he'll stretch things as much as he can to get contacts in, working Saturdays sometimes and after hours, so to speak. Of course, he has to coordinate this with the medical people on board and all, but nevertheless, he's got the will to put up with a lot of it. And voice QSOs and voice repeater operations. We're working on an update to the Kenwood software. That has been a problem in the past, and we're hoping to get it reloaded by Michael, get it approved by the Soviets or the Russians, and get it reloaded during this mission. Do the slow scan operations. One of the old Ericsson radios on board has had a problem, and actually one of them has been hidden away in some compartment somewhere, and we've more or less lost it. But they're going to find it and do some radio checkout on the old Ericsson radios on board, and of course support the Owen Garriott stuff. So Mike will be up there for quite a while. He's a regular, about a 6-month tour, and we look forward to a lot of good ARIS contacts out of Michael. Now, Frank, we can always use a little help with the first thing on the list here, SuitSat hardware development. We're well along with that, but there's still jobs to do. ARIS operations support, that's mentors to go out to the schools and do various things. This is I won't dwell on this, but we've had some changes in the organization in the last year. Robin Hayton, VE3FRH, stepped down as the Canadian delegate, and Ken Pulfer, VE3PU, has stepped up. And I'm sorry, I got it wrong. Robin has stepped down and is being replaced by Daniel Lamoureux, VE2KA, reading the chart wrong. And Ken Pulfer is being replaced by Stefan Wagner out in the Manitoba, Winnipeg, Manitoba, in the organization. Here's the pictures of the 2 L and S band antennas module that are now in orbit within the last year. To a lot of effort of Gaston and a lot of other people around over the country, over the world. Let's see, I don't want to dwell on this too much, but there are differences. Times have changed. Ham radio was maybe in some respects a little more important back in the days of Mir, because they didn't, for crew morale and so on, because they didn't have so many new features like we have nowadays with the iPad. But nevertheless, there's still proven educational outreach that is available with actually not a whole lot of effort up on the space station. And a lot of the dyed-in-the-wool hams up there can use it and really help everyone around the world have fun talking to the astronauts as well. We have learned a couple of things. One in particular, that after 7 years of continuous operation, we've had a few problems, and particularly with the non dedicated ham crews that have been up there. We definitely need more automation and all, more needs to be completely autonomous. In other words, turn it on, turn the knob to the channel and talk. And we've had some trouble in that area using modern day menu-driven radios and so on when the software fails like it did on the D700 for a while. Let's see. Talk a little bit about the SUTSAT 2 thing up in the corner here. There's still some movement in that area as to exactly what's going to be done and exactly when. The SUTSAT core hardware is being developed for voice and packet and flow scan and so on. It's a whole new transceiver concept, so to speak. It'll have a software-defined transponder on board so that we can actually do some communications through the thing, through the SUTSAT 2. It will have the capability of some student experiment work. There's 4 experiment ports, and part of the discussion we had last week in Moscow, I'll show some pictures of it in a minute, but had to do with the Kursk University in Russia is the first one that has signed up to do an experiment on one of the experiment ports, and it sounded very interesting, and we're working with them to define the interfaces better and get that going. So there's a lot of things that are going to be possible with SUTSAT 2. Another thing that we're trying to improve now, the most desirable in my way of thinking, and I think a lot of other people's, I think Carlos alluded to it yesterday morning, direct contacts probably have the most impact on the students, but there are many, many times when a direct contact with the space station is just not possible for various reasons. And so we use a telebridge network where stations strategically are placed around the Earth, make the contact with the space station and tie it together with telephone communications then to the various schools around over the world as well. And we're looking to expand that network. The current network is shown here. We've got 2 in Australia, 1 in South Africa, 1 in Belgium, about 3 in the U.S., 4, one of the 4 in the U.S. is not active, and the one shown up there in Winnipeg, Manitoba is just now coming online. And then of course we have the one in Hawaii. But we're looking to expand that network to something much more like this. We'd like to increase the number of stations in Australia. We definitely have a big gap through South America, and there's a lot of potential for, if we could get a hold of some good telebridge stations in South America, to give us much more, many more passes. Also up in Alaska, many more passes to do telebridge contacts with or through. I might add that there's 2 or 3 reasons that we use telebridge contacts when we can't do directs. One, there's places that would like to do a contact, but they just don't have the hardware to do it, to do a direct. They don't have the local ham support in some areas to do it, and that's one reason. Another reason is a lot of times schools only want to do a contact on school hours and during a school time that's available, and of course orbital mechanics are just not very cooperative in all of that. So many times in order to do a contact in Fort Worth, Texas, we've got to do due to time constraints of the school, we've got to do it with a telebridge station somewhere else in the world, Australia or South Africa or wherever, and that we try to do directs as much as possible. We like them better. I think the students get more out of it. But there's times, and another reason for that is not a school necessarily, but let's say it's a museum or a exposition, space exposition, or something like the museum contact at National Aerospace Museum in the U.S. They only happen on a certain day, and well, it's very unlikely that you'll have a space station pass over that area exactly when you want it. But with a telebridge, you can pick and choose, and if you do it right with a telebridge and bring some radios to the room and have somebody demonstrate it and have a map up on the wall, a tracking map, and show people that yes, it comes. We're going to first start talking to it when the footprint crosses over the line into the telebridge station, and they hear that and see that. They can still get a lot of value out of it if it's treated right. But that's part of the problem. The third problem that we run into is the crews. The crews are only available certain parts of the day, and that's to some degree incompatible with some parts of the world. We're fighting a situation right now where New Zealand has not made any contacts through the space station yet. Part of the problem is they are literally on the crews normally work let's say a 8 to 5, it's not exactly that, but 8 to 5 work day on UTC time, and New Zealand is just on the other side of that. So most of the time the crew's asleep when they're near New Zealand, and we've got to figure out how to break that and get a time shift either on the crew or get the people to come participate in the contact in the middle of the night, their time. So it's kind of a hard thing to coordinate sometimes. Better move on here, but we have SUTSAT 1, that's just a review from it. It lasted from February the 3rd of 06 to September the 7th of 06. We had a lot of fun with a lot of kids over that. Want to talk, well, SUTSAT of the future, or SUTSAT 2, we did have on this chart late 2008 for shipping it to Russia. As we've heard all throughout the conference, things tend to slip a little bit, and we're now predicting sometime in 2009 due to several things: designing and building the hardware, coordinating with the Russians, shipping the hardware to Russia through all of the customs, the ins and outs that it has to go through, and there are just a number of things that cause things to slip. But it's looking like, and we did make good progress, I think, last week in making some good contacts to finalize these things and get the skids greased, so to speak, to get that in there, but not in late 2008. It'll be sometime in 2009 probably. And part of that, of course, is the experiments, getting the experiments defined that they want to put on board. We're using some of the old stuff too, but a lot of it is new, and you see on here we can have up to 4 experiment ports and 4 cameras for slow scan work. Using some college students and all, or well, scouts and later on in college students too, to help build some of this hardware. I know I'm jumping around a lot here, but Frank also wanted to just briefly introduce the idea that we're now working on the trip to the moon that we're hoping to do by several years out, particularly if you talk to school kids that are in the lower grades like I do a lot, first, second, third grade kids. These are the kids that will be going to the moon. You get involved in science now, involved in engineering, involved in space, and you will probably be the ones that will do that, not us old fogies that are around here now. Line here, it was announced last week that we now hold URL back. It hasn't, I don't think the transition is complete over to that yet. I haven't checked it, but we will soon be going off of the, or at least duplicating what's currently on the Radio Amateurs of Canada site and a www.aris.org site. So we've got our new our old URL back. Brief mention, we've expanded our internet, voice over internet protocol coverage, Echolink and IRLP. Many of you have probably looked at this sometimes, and we seem to have more people outside the U.S. than we do inside the U.S., so that's good. A little bit more about the Columbus. Now, I threw in a few pictures just from last week. These aren't showing up as good as I had hoped, but we did tour near the end of the conference the Energia Space Museum, and I didn't throw in anywhere near all of the pictures that everybody took. I picked a few. Down in the lower left-hand corner, that's Sergei Samburov, RV3DR, and his great-grandfather, K.E. Tchaikovsky, probably the father of Russian rocketry and all, and at least thought of space operations. We'll see more from that in a minute. Of course, everybody probably recognizes Sputnik up in the middle, Sputnik 1. You may not recognize the one to the right, which is an exploded view of Sputnik. That was an engineering model opened up the way it was for access and use. The item on the left up the top, that's the radio that they used in 1957 to listen for it. So, and down in the right-hand corner, there's a picture. I don't know whether you recognize him, but in the middle is Sergei Krikalev. My first acquaintance with Sergei is back in 1991. A group of us in Fort Worth, Texas, where I'm from, put together a full-blown amateur radio and amateur radio satellite station in a museum in Fort Worth that was hosting the Soviet space exhibit for 6 months in that museum. And we regularly talked to Sergei when he was on board Mir at that time. He's U5MIR, and we borrowed the call sign. We couldn't get one assigned to us by our FCC, but we borrowed W5MIR from a ham in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we had W5MIR talking to U5MIR on an almost daily basis between the museums. So we had a good relationship with Sergei. I believe the lady, yeah, what? Yeah, I was thinking she's a Brit, isn't she? Yeah, she was up there at the same time. Now, Sergei arranged a trip for us to Kaluga. Now, Kaluga is a 125, 30 miles from, or kilometers from Moscow, south and a little west, and it kind of gave us a chance to get away from the big city. Kaluga is not a village, it's a pretty good sized city too, but certainly nothing the size of Moscow. And it's the town where Tchaikovsky lived most of his later life and taught and did his writing and everything. So you might say it's not where he was born, but it's his hometown, so to speak. And we just had a real ball. You probably recognize Graham up there, and Graham and Carlos, and there's Sergey standing there on the front steps of the hotel in Kaluga. Sunday morning, we were there Saturday and Sunday, rode the train down Saturday morning and back Sunday afternoon. Sunday morning, they took us to the Kaluga Space School. They have a school there that's dedicated to teaching kids about math and science and space, and it was really interesting. They have a little polar bear and a guy in a spacesuit as kind of their emblem and mascot, so to speak. The two pictures at the bottom are of us as we were getting briefings. I just wanted to bring those up. There's the lady standing up was the translator, and you see the rest of us listening to all of some of their students, not all of their students by any means. Younger kids, they had kids younger than these too, but just wanted to show some of their people. This is kind of a look around the room. These are models that up in the upper left that they had made of various space-related things and ham radio-related things. In the upper right is their club station, their amateur radio club station, and some QSL cards on the wall from that station. And then in the lower left over here, they took us out in the courtyard and did a number of model rocket shots for us. And they didn't all work, but all of the big ones don't always work either. So this is a picture of, actually that's Frank Bauer's daughter, and she was small enough to set in there. We got a big fella in there too. We got Mark, I can't think of his last name right now, but he squeezed into that, and he's almost twice as tall as Michelle. We toured around the town a little bit. This big monument you see, that's Tchaikovsky, and a little better shot of him standing up beside the rocket. And then, of course, everybody discussing it over lunch in a restaurant. I think you probably recognize a couple of people in there. Lou McFadden and Face On, and of course, Graham. This was in a little house there in the village. This is Sergey with a picture of Tchaikovsky, and then the lower right, there's Tchaikovsky up in the upper picture, and the lady in the lower left of that picture is Sergey's mother. So it was an interesting deal. We've kind of finished up with some SUTSAT 2 discussions. We went into where they had, this is actually in the room where they talk about and practice EVA work. They had a suit in there, and we made sure that the proposed new antennas and new controls and all would fit on top of it okay. And they actually measured the cable lengths of what the cabling would have to be to get inside the suit and hook things up. I don't think Mark would appreciate the look on his face in that picture, but I showed it to him, and he says, "Oh, I'm a good sport." So, anyway, and there's Michelle again, peering out through the visor of the spacesuit. And the people down in the lower right, Lou McFadden from our side, and the two fellows on the right, Lou's on the left, the two fellows on the right are from Kursk University talking about their experiment, and the lady in the middle is the interpreter. And boy, she was one fantastic interpreter. That lady could go either direction at full speed at all times. I've never seen the likes of that. And that's the end of it, I guess.